Tom Campbell here. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you and enjoy the video.
We also have a question now from Eric. Please go ahead.
Hello, Tom.
Hello, Eric.
Okay, I have a question about the nature of consciousness. So many years ago, before I knew anything about spirituality, I was given the experience that you describe as connecting with the larger consciousness system. And the essence of this experience was that my sense of identity shifted from being a separate individual to being all that is. And what I realized is that my most fundamental identity is the one universal consciousness. Reality is one being and I am it. That experience seriously intensified my spiritual search, and I ran into many spiritual teachers who resonated with me because they were saying things that were in alignment with my realization. They would say things such as, there's only the one universal consciousness, God, and you are it. And every person you meet is also it. We are all the same one universal consciousness. There is no other. It's all you. There's only God and it's playing all the parts, and so on. But then when I found you and your work, the one thing that was kind of curious to me is that you don't tend to say such things. Instead, you tend to say things like, you are an individuated unit of consciousness among many such units, which sounds more separative. In fact, I recently heard another spiritual teacher disagree with your work because he thought that you wouldn't say to people that they are the LCS, but instead you would say that they are an individuated unit of consciousness. Could you please clarify that?
Sure. Yes, I would say, if somebody, talking on that subject, I would say that you are a part of the larger consciousness system. I would not say you are the larger consciousness system. The larger consciousness system is more than you are. So this idea that, God is everything, you are God, I would not go there. To me, that's confusing. I understand the point that they're going from. I too have had that experience that you were talking about where you become one. I've had that many times. And yes, indeed, you are one with everything. But you are one with everything for a while. It's something that comes and goes. You're not still in that state. It's a state, it's a place where you've been. Okay? And you are connected with the one. But I would not say, I don't think it's helpful to tell people that they are God, that they are the one. They aren't. Everything is the one. You and me and all the IUOCs together and the larger consciousness system, we're a piece of that system. And all together, we make up the one. But we're all pieces of it. Now, we could take something like an automobile and we could break it up into all its pieces. And we lay all its pieces together. And we could say, all right, these are all pieces of an automobile. Okay, you transmission, you are one with the automobile. And you are the automobile. And I'd say, no, you're not. You're just the transmission. All right, do the transmission's work. And let the gear, let the motor do the motor's work, and let the tires do the tires' work. We're all part of a bigger thing. And the whole bigger thing only exists because it has all of its parts. But it's not necessary for you to be God. And I think that is not helpful to people. I think that confuses them. I think it's better that they see themselves, there is just one thing. Yes, I agree with that. I'm a non-dualist. There's but one thing, and that's the larger conscious system. That's it. And we're all just subsets of that. But being a subset doesn't mean you're it. It means you're a subset. You're a piece of it. And you're an important piece of it. And as this piece, you have a job to do, just like the transmission has a job to do. And the way you benefit the whole is by doing your job. Your job is to get rid of your fear and ego and beliefs and become love. That's your job, is to do that. And as you do that, lower your entropy, the entropy of the system is lowered as well. So because you're part of that system. You're not the system. You're part of the system. And I think seeing that differentiation is important because still non-dual, they're still just as one thing, but it has a lot of piece parts that do different things. They have different functions. And the whole thing can't work unless all those functions are working. You can't have a whole automobile without a transmission. You can't have a whole automobile, without a motor, without wheels, this is all kinds of pieces, and they're all critical to that thing. Otherwise, the automobile isn't an automobile. It's just a piece of junk if it doesn't have a transmission. You can sit in it and listen to the radio, but you can't take it anyplace. It doesn't work. It doesn't fulfill its mission. It needs you to fulfill its mission. So what that does is it puts the individual into a knowing that they are a piece of consciousness. They are just a part of the whole. Chip off the old block, a subset. So much of us and our consciousness is very much like the larger conscious system. The awareness, the ability to process, intuition, intellect, all of this. We have it just like the larger conscious system has it. That's consciousness. We're a piece of that consciousness. So yeah, we are a part of it, but we have our role to play. It has its role to play, and together we all evolve. So that's more of my picture that is different than their picture. For them, the piece parts aren't important. There's just this one thing, and you are the one thing, and there really isn't a mission or a working together or really a reason. It just is, and that's it. And once you accept that it is, you're done. To me, that isn't all that helpful to the person, because an individual says, well, okay, but what's my part? What should I do? How should I live my life? How can I make my choices? Here I am. I've got this body. I'm a human being. Now, how should I proceed in order to express me being part of consciousness? How do I do that? Well, if you just say, well, you're already God, you don't need to do anything. That's not helpful to the individual. That leaves them stuck in a big space with actually no direction of what to become or how to be, or how do you contribute to the system? How do you be an effective part of this system? How do you help the whole system? No, you're not an independent thing. You are a piece of consciousness with the attributes of consciousness, but you're not the larger consciousness system, because that also has other properties, other things that it has to do. It's the operating system. It's the thing that communicates to the rest of us. It's the thing that can help us out. It's got the bigger picture. It makes it creates the virtual reality in which we can play and learn more effectively. You see, it's got a different role. It's got kind of the executive role, but it's still just a piece of consciousness like what we are. And we could say, well, the larger conscious system is just a bigger, more highly developed IUOC. And I would agree with that. Yeah, okay, we could call it. It's also an individuated unit of consciousness. I would not argue too much with that to say it's an IUOC too. And we say, well, we're all IUOCs, but it's not exactly the same. We're not all equivalent. So the God is everything and you are God is really, to me, kind of part of a picture. It's not the whole picture. The whole picture is, yes, there is this one thing. It is consciousness. But you also have something to do about it. You also have choices, and your choices are important. And what you do is important, and it's important to the whole. So recognize what you are, recognize the role you play, recognize the responsibility you have, and get after it. Do it, become it, and help the system, help yourself. So I see us not as a thing, God, and everybody's God. So there is this one thing. I see us as a single system that has a lot of piece parts. The system consciousness takes a part of itself and configures it as the server for our virtual reality. It takes a part of itself and reconfigures it into, Tom Campbell and Eric and Caroline and Donna. It's just a piece of the larger conscious system that configures into that entity, because that entity is useful to its own growth. Because without all those IUOCs, the larger consciousness system as just one entity is stuck. It's not going to grow that fast. It's just one thing with one set of ideas and one whatever, and there's nothing but the one. Well, that's back at the point where evolution started to slow down. It needed to break itself into pieces, give those pieces free will. Now the possibilities grow. What can happen from all of those individuated units of consciousness is a much bigger thing than what could happen from just the one. Now you've got chance for cooperation, caring. See, all sorts of things start to pop out that are important to the system. Well, you couldn't go there. So the fact that it configures itself into various things to help its own evolution, and we're one of those things, I think we need to understand that as a difference from this, there's God and everything's God and you're God and that's it. I just answered every question that there ever could be. That's just one simple answer. It is all God. So go live your life, be happy, goodbye. It's too simple, too pat, and it doesn't actually explain anything. It's, like I asked the non-dualist, well, why did God make people? Why IUOCs? And they gave a very unsatisfactory answer. Well, God can do whatever he wants. Yes, but why? What pushed him? What made him want to do that? Create these people. And then you have the people, and what do you do with them? Oh, you put them in a virtual reality, make them suffer. And then when they're done suffering, you bring them back to just what they were in the first place. And that's because you just enjoy making things suffer, or, why? And the answer I got was, why did God make the people? Was because the same reason why people have children. He just wanted to have a baby. God wanted to have a baby, and he just, people want to have babies too, and it's the same thing. That was kind of the result I got. Well, I find that very unsatisfying. There's no logic in that. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But when I see a larger consciousness system was stuck in its evolution, well, not really stuck. It could still evolve, but it was slowed down. And that it could evolve much more effectively by creating IUOCs. And then it could make a virtual reality because to help those IUOCs evolve. And see, all these things work out. So why did God want to make an earth and put people on it? Well, he wanted a baby, and I don't know. Who knows why God does what God does? Don't ask me. They don't have answers for that. So a non-dualist theory that doesn't actually, answer the questions of what happened earlier. Where did the larger conscious system come from? Well, it started as just a single cell that just knew this from that. And from there it grew and made patterns and then patterns of patterns. And you can see the whole evolution up to what we have now. And why people? Why virtual realities? Why reincarnation? Well, all of that is absolutely logical and necessary for the whole system to evolve. And in a non-dualist mind who doesn't have that, they got the middle part. We're all one. Yes. And we agree on all that middle part. But the beginnings and the endings of why the people, why evolution, why the virtual reality, where's it all going, they don't. And usually their end game is, the end game is that you return to the Godhead. So you are into Godhead to begin with, so you come out and suffer, and after you've done a lot of suffering, you return, and now you're back where you started. So you had this little journey of suffering to do. And why is that? What does that serve? You see, in other words, they don't have any explanations for why things are the way they are. Why the virtual reality? Why? What is the end game? Well, there is no end game. It's evolution. Evolution continues on. You just keep evolving. And as soon as you stop trying to evolve, you start de-evolving, because that's the nature of entropy. So it's an open-ended thing that goes wherever it can go. So anyway, those are the differences between what you were saying, which is basically the classical non-dualist thing, God is all, and my thing, which tries to provide a rational theory that explains why things are the way they are. And as a secondary kind of, what can we say, as kind of fallout from that process, not even intended initially, but as a fallout from that process, you can explain things like quantum physics and relativity, speed of light, and why we have those 5 or 6 cosmic constants that are all tuned to 8 decimal places. How did that come about? And where did the Big Bang come from? And what does that expanding universe expand into if there's nothing there? And et cetera. There's all these questions that we have that don't have really a good explanation if it's just, well, everything's God and God does it. That isn't a good answer. It's not an answer that actually is logical, that you can derive then a lot of other things from. So that's the big difference. From just a non-dualist, they can't tell you why quantum physics should be, describe particles as probability distributions. They won't come out with that. That's not part of where their logic will take them, or why C is a constant, or why those, or why lots of things. There's lots and lots of those things. Where does time come from? Well, God makes it. Where does anything come from? Well, God makes it. And you're God too. You made it. So to me, that was unacceptable. I guess to my physics brain, I had trouble with that. I wanted more in detailed answers. That's too big. Yeah, okay, I could say that too. Well, why did these things? Well, the larger conscious system did it. But to me, that's not so helpful. True, it's absolutely true. It's just not helpful. It's much more helpful to have a system that squarely tells people, what's your role? Where do you fit into all of this? And to let them know that their role is important and that they are important. Their choices are important. They're part of something that's evolving and moving forward. And, their role is very significant. It's not that, hey, you really don't have a role. You're just God. Be nice to people. Like, why should I be nice? Well, you're God, and God likes people who are nice. Well, how do you know God likes people that are nice? Why does he like people that are nice? Well, he just does. That's just the way it is. Nice is nice. God is nice, so he must like people that are nice. That's all kind of circular reasoning that doesn't go anyplace. It doesn't have any logical flow to it, any context to it. So that's really, it's that whole thing. It's kind of different between MBT and the classical non-dualism that makes me different than a lot of the Buddhists, and a lot of the other kinds of non-dualists as well, as I have it laid out in metaphors that have meaning, that explain things like, well, why reincarnation? Why humans? Why make a world and put humans on it? Why do all this? What's really the point? If God's all-knowing, knows everything, has everything, what's he doing? Certainly he doesn't enjoy making people suffer. Then what's the point? And there doesn't seem to be a point. Well, God moves in mysterious ways, and it's just not for us to know. That was not ever a very satisfying answer to me. So I wanted to understand it better than that. And once I got into consciousness and out of body and doing those things, I knew there were answers, real logical answers, not just, you're God. So that's the difference. I know you've asked other questions before, kind of poking around at the same sort of thing, but that's kind of it. I've gotten a lot of that lately, so I kind of made this a little longer talk too, because I've been hearing a lot from the non-dualist group lately. But that's the main difference between MBT and non-dualism. Mine is a logical process, and still I get at my beginning, well, where did that original consciousness cell come from? And I got to do what they do. I got to kind of, put my hands up and grab stuff out of the air and say, well, I really don't know, but maybe it was sort of like this. So I start with one of those in my assumptions as well. You have to, because you're consciousness. You can't get outside of consciousness to do any better than that. It's just, you're stuck there. But there's a lot more you can do. You don't have to just stay there, which is where they do. They just stay at that same point. Well, then, God's all there is.
Yeah, I agree with everything you say. It makes total sense. I do want to ask a little follow-up. Would you agree with me that it's also a matter of the perspective that we want to take? So let's say that we're looking at the ocean. We're looking at a wave on the ocean. And from one perspective, we could say it's a wave and limit our view there. And from another perspective, we could say that's the ocean. And so in the same way, you could choose to say, okay, you, Tom, are an individuated unit of consciousness, which is one perspective. Or we could say you are the LCS, like the entirety of the system, in the same way that you could say that to a wave. Mm-hmm. It's sort of, if you say you're an individuated unit of consciousness, of course that's true, and it's more practical because of reasons that you just described. But you're also creating maybe a rather arbitrary cutoff point to a system that is fundamentally one whole thing. So it's maybe a matter of, do you want to see it in its piece parts, or do you want to look at it as one holistic thing? Mm-hmm. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. But here's my take on that. Yes, you can look at it as what's one holistic thing, and you could. And I do that as well. That's the larger consciousness system. That's the one holistic thing. So let's take your ocean for an example. You can say, well, yeah, there's waves, there's this and that. It's all just the ocean. It's the ocean. And I say, okay, that's nice. But what about this? This is a tidal wave. What about this? This is a tsunami that's, a wave that's 300 feet tall. What about all these currents in the ocean that are spreading, that spread warm water that basically creates the Earth's climates? What about that? Oh, no, don't worry about any of that stuff. It's just the ocean. Nah, forget that. Waves, tidal wave, it's just the ocean. Well, that's true. It is all the ocean. Those currents are the ocean, the waves are the ocean, all those things are the ocean. But I look at it and say, well, okay, I see that it's all the ocean. But I also see that there's things going on in that ocean. There's waves. There's this, there's rogue waves, there's tsunamis, there's currents that make the Earth's climate the way it is. There's things that you can learn and understand, as opposed to just saying it's an ocean. It's all just an ocean. Okay, it is. Now what? Or so what? I agree, it's an ocean. It doesn't buy you much. Once you say, but I want to understand the ocean better. So a wave is a part of the ocean. Currents are part of the ocean. The seaweed that grows in there is part of the ocean. The plankton in there is part of it's all the ocean. But that plankton gives us like 30% of all the oxygen we breathe. Kind of a little important, just like those currents that give us our weather patterns and make Europe a place that's habitable and not, frozen tundra. Well, those things are interesting to know, and they help us. They help us understand things. You know, if all it was just an ocean and just the air, then we'd never right now be aware of global warming and our part in it and what we need to do to change it. So it helps us be more intelligent, act more intelligently, and understand our world if we say it's an ocean, but it's got waves. And here's the way the waves work. And here's the function of the waves. And it's got tides. And the tides have something to do with the moon and gravity. And now we can understand that. So the more you understand, the more useful it all becomes. And the more you can be intelligent in your interaction with it. You see? So that's my point. I would agree. It's all ocean. Those currents, those waves, those tides, ocean. But to stop there and not ask any more questions, to not want to differentiate, well, there's different kinds of things going on in the ocean, and why are they different? And what drives them? And you know, what do they do? Those are questions that need to be asked, and they have very practical effects that we have that knowledge. I'd say the exact same thing with the God thing. Okay, it's all consciousness. Call consciousness God, if you like. You know, it's all God, it's all consciousness. Okay, but to just stop there is to like look at the cover of the book, get what you can out of the cover, and then throw the book away. You know, there's more to it. Let's find out what those piece parts are and why are they like that? Why does the thing have waves? Oh, wind. Oh, you know, tides. Oh, there's all kinds of things going on. And what do they do? Well, those waves, they erode shorelines and they do other kinds of things, but they stir up sediment, and that sediment creates food for certain kinds of critters. And let's learn as much as we can and understand as much as we can and still be aware of it's an ocean. It's the larger consciousness system. It's everything. It's one thing, and we're all pieces of it. Well, I agree. Your analogy is right, but why stop and refuse to have greater knowledge of the ocean when that knowledge could be very useful and very helpful to our understanding and our own growth? So to me, it's just a matter of, you know, curiosity and wanting to understand. But I find in all that understanding is helpful. You know, it's not just superfluous understanding. The fact that we understand waves and wave powers, and we can create generators that generate electricity out of waves because we understand these things. You know, there's just a lot of value comes from knowledge. So when you quit short, okay, they were right. Larger conscious system, it's everything. Everything is a piece of it. But that's not all the value that you can get out of it. There's more value in it that is left lying if you don't go any further than that. It's true, but there's more value there. Same with the ocean. It is perspective. One perspective just kind of looks at the cover of the book and reads the introduction and then throws the book away because they've read it. But the other one is going to go through it and find out more details and what was it about and why is it like that? And who wrote that book and why did they write it? And you'll find out a whole lot more than if you just don't dig in to try to make logical sense. Now, see, this is Tom Campbell, the physicist, talking to you, right? I'm a scientist. I have a scientific viewpoint. I want to know how things work and why they work that way. But my scientific viewpoint doesn't have to say all the pieces are all separate and are all, you know, their own individual things. No, of course not. I see all the piece parts are all part of one thing. That's understandable because that's the way it is. That's the truth. They're right. There is just this one thing and everything else is a piece of that. But those pieces and understanding them has value to us. So if I tell you, you know, you're an individuated unit of consciousness and your point in this existence is to grow up, get rid of your fear. Well, now that gives you a job that you didn't have otherwise. That gives you a very specific job because we're talking about ego and belief and fear. These are all dysfunctional things. So it focuses you. That's news that you can use, just like tides are news that you can use. Why are there tides? So that's why science tries to understand things, is because the understanding has value. And I would say the same thing. Sure, it's perspective. A wave on an ocean, it's all the ocean. But those waves are a part of that ocean. So are the currents. And they're very important things for us to understand. They're not just meaningless information. We're not just slicing and dicing things apart just to do it. We're finding real significant value in understanding the piece parts. So that's what I think is the difference.
If I may make one last comment, I'm sorry I'm taking a lot of time on this, but I also see value in the holistic approach, in the sense that there are a lot of waves on the ocean who feel very separate and isolated, and they don't realize that they're the entire ocean. Mm-hmm. And so for those waves, speaking metaphorically, of course, it can be very powerful and useful to realize that they are in fact one with the one. And that actually takes away a lot of fear, and it connects them with all the other waves. And I do see that the non-dualists sort of emphasize that point more in a practical sense, in order to get individuated units of consciousness to realize that they are more than just a separate thing, and they are actually one with consciousness, which is actually a very powerful and helpful realization. And it certainly has been for me. And I think that there is a risk for that to get lost when we focus more on what you're now driving at, which is all the individual piece parts and their functions, and which was kind of what I was missing initially with MBT. It was a little bit too separative for me, and I kept looking for the part where you were going to say we're all one. I was like, when is he going to say it? When is he going to say it? So that's why I also keep asking you about this. It's like I kind of just want to hear you say it. Like, yes, we are one.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. I am very much in favor of the non-dualists, and what they say is true. We are all one, and telling people the truth is always a good thing. Those people who are feeling lost and lonely and separate, to let them know that they're part of something larger, that is good. Okay, but once you've done that, why stop there when there's more to the story? Why not tell the rest of the story too? Because that's also important to them. That gives them, what's your role? What's your significance in this thing? Not just some wave that belongs to the ocean, okay, but you have an important role to play as well. So I do say lots of times we're all one. We're chips off the same block. Consciousness is the only thing that is fundamental. You should hear me say that a lot. But I don't just stop there. That's true. And I go on. And yes, there is some risk that people would go on and somehow lose sight of that. But I tend to reiterate that a whole lot. We're all one thing. Consciousness is the only thing that's fundamental. We're all piece parts of that. So I think that the non-dualists do serve a very important part, an important role, because they are spreading a very important truth, a truth that I recognize. But I do that too. I just do other things. I do more. I go beyond that. I don't stop there. Where they stop at that point, I go on and try to describe more of, what does it mean? How does it all come together? What is this, remote viewing or healing with the mind? How does that work? Well, that's a good thing to ask, to understand. How does it work? These are things that are helpful to know how these things work, how it is that you can make people ill or make people healthy. The power you have, the interaction power. People should know that and understand it. And yes, some people will get lost in that. There won't be anything else. But I can't help that. I tell them the same thing the non-dualists tell them, and I tell them often. But I also say that there's more to this story than that. There's more understanding to be gained there. So I don't think non-dualists are not right or should be quiet or something. They are speaking the truth, and that truth needs to be said. I just think there's more to say about that truth that is helpful to people. Now, I call myself a non-dualist. I am in their camp. I just have a beginning and an ending that they don't share. They have just the middle.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Don. That clarified a lot, and I'm happy to hear you confirm that now.
Sure. Okay.
Thank you, Eric. What I'm going to do, we have a unique opportunity here. We've got a little bit of time left. And what I can do is jump into some of the MBT forum questions. This is unique that we have some time for these. So let me do that. And if any of you have questions that come up from this discussion, you can jump in. But I'll start with an MBT forum question. And this question comes from Mercer Soul, and it is on the role of thought-provoking works of fiction. Tom, a big interest of mine is experiencing thought-provoking works of fiction and emotionally resonating with them. What value does fiction have in this sense from an MBT perspective? Is it a waste of time, even if it maybe doesn't increase the quality of my consciousness, even though it's something very important to me? Can you comment on that?
Well, sure. Fiction is entertaining possibilities. And it's always not possibilities in structure or worldview, but possibilities in relationship, possibilities in the way people act and interact with each other. So fiction is kind of a romp through the possibilities. All fiction books start with a kind of a premise, a plot, a thing that happens, and then people tend to interact and connect to that thing. Well, when you read fiction, you're reading possibilities of interaction, possibilities of attitude, ways people connect, how they interact with each other. And all of that is useful to who you are and to your own life. It's expanding your experience space. Just like you read a biography. If you read a biography, not fiction, that expands your experience space. This is how somebody went about their life, what they did, how they did it, their relationships, their connections, their achievements. So you read about all that, and that gives you some bigger dimension on the possibilities. And fiction does much the same thing. It gives you some expansion on all the possibilities. So fiction has that role like any other. And fiction is easier to set forth a point that you're trying to get across, or a point that you're trying to make, than using nonfiction. Let's say you're trying to talk about ethical and meaningful choices. Well, there's a whole lot of fiction that does that. I think I mentioned one earlier, what I said, A Tale Between Two Cities. It just came up. Well, what's that about? It's about choice. It's about growing up to where it's not all about you. It's about somebody else. You see, so fiction can also be a learning tool. You can see how various characters act and interact, the things they do, and what it causes. Usually you find, the bad guys in the black hats who do not nice things, and that usually ends up creating trouble for them. And the good guys in the white hats who, are nice to each other and helpful to other people, they end up usually doing pretty well. They win in the end. Well, why is that? I mean, it's not always that way. Sometimes, people will write a book contrary to where the, evil wins and good is trumped, but that's an unsatisfying book. People generally don't like that kind of a book. That's why that kind of an ending isn't used that often. It's a rare ending. That's because people like to read things that are reinforcing in what they know to be true, that good triumphs over evil. So how better to do that with, in a million different ways, but with fiction, because you can make the story up just to show the points you're trying to show, the ethics you're trying to demonstrate, and what different ethical choices cause to happen. So fiction's important to people, just like biographies and nonfiction is important. I don't see that one's more important or more real than the other. They're all very significant. And both can be entertaining as well, which is another purpose of literature. It's not just to help people learn and grow by example of the characters. It's also just entertainment. There's nothing wrong with entertainment. Entertainment can be relaxing. It can be a time to just enjoy things with other people or even by yourself, to expose your mind to another set of possibilities just for the pleasure of it, just for the fun of it. Sometimes the fiction can be funny, and sometimes the biography or the nonfiction can be funny too. But fiction has a much wider scope of what it can say and how it can configure it, whereas biography and nonfiction has to stick to what happened. So it doesn't quite have the breadth of material that it can work from. So I think literature is important for what it can teach us, just by giving us a wider breadth of possibility, a wider breadth of experience. And all of that becomes part of our experience base. When you read a book, that becomes part of your experience base. You read fiction, that story, that happened and those people acted that way becomes part of your experience base. So it's part of who and what we are. What we read affects us, part of our learning tools. I don't know. I guess he's not here to do a comeback, but I think I've probably answered his question.
You answered it beautifully, Tom. That was really nice. We are waiting on Guillaume. We'll give him just a second. He's coming down the stairs. He's got his question. Guillaume, just in time. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, Tom. I guess I have another question again about some kind of the artist way. The reason I often ask a question about the arts in general is because I something feel like creativity in our society is kind of a curse, because it's really difficult to earn a living by doing some arts. So I'm going to read my question. I'm about certain that art, music, poetry are the very medicines we need, yet they are the very things our modern minds and societies drop by the wayside. I'm pretty sure that the ultimate source and destination of creative work lies in the wholeness of our consciousness, in interconnectedness with the big system. Will you comment with some of your wisdom on that statement?
Okay, sure. I agree with you. Of course, art, music, poetry are expressions that cut across, cut very, very broad swaths across large numbers of people. And art can be looked at by people who speak 10 different languages, and all of them will get something out of that. It's not a specific thing. It's a broad thing. It's art and music and poetry apply to humans, not just to specific kinds. Now, some is focused at specific kinds, like some music might be a folk dance that's Romanian or something like that. But everybody can listen to it and enjoy it and feel the energy in it and feel maybe the joy in it. or the sadness in it or whatever. So even if it is for a specific audience, everybody can appreciate art. So art is an important part of our expression of our consciousness and who we are. And the fact that it seems to be only in the margins, it's not so mainstream, is just because we are very unbalanced in the fact that most people develop their intellectual side very much. They work on that. They work on it and work on it. They practice it. They go to school. They develop that intellectual side, and they don't develop their intuitive side or their intuition much at all. They let that side kind of go. Matter of fact, many people even deny that such a thing as intuition even exists. So that's the thing. Art is intuitive. What you get out of a piece of art is intuitive. And if you're one of these people that looks at a piece of art and marvels at how fast that guy can play that instrument or the detail of those brushstrokes, you're missing the point. That's not it. The art is intuitive. It's not a rational discussion of the details. That's not really what makes the art. The art isn't just the what rational details that go into making it. It's the meaning, it's the feeling, it's the thought that's conveyed. Is the art. So if you're in a society where the intuition is an infant, is not developed, is even denied, then you're going to be in a society where art is in the margins. Because art is an intuitive process. The artist is intuitive in his taking the idea, the feeling, the subject, and getting it out in whether it's music or paint or sculpture or poetry or whatever. That's an intuitive process for the artist, and it's an intuitive process for the person that views the art. So that's why art is not given but short shrift in our culture, is because we are very left brain dominant. We're very logical process dominant, and we don't give a lot of credibility or interest in the intuitive side of our existence. Now, probably go back 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, and you'd be just the opposite. You'd find that the intuitive side of us was probably the most developed side, and that the intellectual side was pretty weak and didn't know much, because we just didn't have enough facts or enough understanding to really be very logical about anything. So our life was mostly done in the intuitive side. And probably then art was probably more mainstream. So it just goes with the culture. That's why art is not mainstream. It's that the intuitive understanding and being sensitive on the intuitive side is not very mainstream. So people look at art and they'll say, well, see, that doesn't really look like a woman coming down a staircase. They're looking at a Picasso maybe, and it's all, they say, gee, that's awful blotchy. You think he could have made it more lifelike than that. They're missing the whole point, obviously, of that art. You see, it's not, an artist is not judged on how close they render reality. Rendering the reality is not really the point. The point is coming up with meaningful feeling and meaningful understanding and connectedness to a person's reality. Not that it has to be realistic. That's we look at cave art, and it's not really realistic, because when you're using burnt ends of sticks to do your for your brush strokes, you're not going to be realistic. The tools you have to work with, or a rock pounding on another rock, you're not going to be that realistic. But we appreciate that cave art just the same, because it tells us something about people and who they were and what they saw, what their reality was like. So anyway, art is a valuable thing. It's just not as appreciated as it will be when we develop our intuitive side, which I think is probably coming. I think we're going through that develop our intellectual side phase of humanity, the science and engineering, evolution, the gadgets, the internet, and all of that stuff needed that intellectual side. And once we have all that to the point that it's hard to add much more to it, then I believe the intuitive side will probably grow back and start to evolve more as well. But right now we're hard over on the intellect, and the arts kind of have to get by in the margins. But there's still a lot of people who appreciate art. Every time I've gone to an art gallery, it's been busy. It's not like I'm the only one in there. There's lots of people walking around in the galleries and looking and appreciating architecture and some of the really nice things that are around now that really are different, that were never there before. Like I go sometimes into a big shopping mall, which is probably as close to chaos as you can get in many ways, but they'll have this beautiful tile work done on the floor, that is just very nice, very nice art, the way they have, just tile work on the floor. Well, that tile work on the floor costs a lot of extra money. Just making a concrete floor is cheap. And just putting some kind of cheap rug on it's cheap, and just putting some kind of cheap tile on it, that's a lot cheaper too. But for some reason, somebody decided that it was worth the money to build something that was pretty, and to make the floors art, and to make the architecture more artful, not just square rectangles, with a bunch of rooms in them, but do something prettier than that. So I see art kind of coming into our society, various places, not necessarily on, the walls of art galleries, but there's still art there, and we're still sensitive to it, and people still like it, and they still appreciate it. It's just not as big a part of our life as it probably will be in the future and has been in the past.
Thanks. I guess I have two more. I've listened to you talking a lot about intellect versus intuition in past interviews and all. And I found that really, really interesting. But could you talk a bit more about the importance of getting tuned in your intuition in creative work, specifically in something like creating an artwork or something more oriented in the now, like music improvisation and its interrelations with the artist, the audience, and maybe the source or something bigger,
Well, that really has to do with the nature of the art and the nature of the artist. If you're in a performing art, then the instrument you play is just a piece of that performance. The presentation, the costume you wear, the way you dress, the way you approach the thing, that's a second piece of it. And the audience and the audience reaction and playing to that audience. So when you do things that your audience is connecting to, you do more of that sort of thing, or you highlight it, you emphasize it. So playing the audience, playing the image, which is the presentation, and then playing the instrument are all three aspects of that art. And all three are art. There's an art to doing all three of those things. So I think that, an artist works in the intuitive. He doesn't work in the intellectual. Matter of fact, that's an artist's bane, is the intellect. As soon as he starts thinking about it, he starts to second guess himself, and he gets messed up. It doesn't feel right after that, and it doesn't work out well after that. So that's one of the biggest things for the artist to have to get through, is to get his own intellect out of the process. Otherwise, he's not so much an artist as he just, you can take a bunch of balloons, put paint in them, scatter them all over a wall that has paper on it, and then use a dart, throw darts and burst the balloons. And then when you're done, you've got this piece of paper with all these colors on it, and that's art. Well, that could be done by a robot just as easily. And though it may be pretty colors, and it may even be interesting for people to look at, but it came from a natural process. So it just depends on, from the artist's viewpoint, there wasn't a lot of art in it other than just coming up with the thing. So the artist itself has very little creative input to it other than coming up with the mechanism. That's it. But as far as the viewer goes, who looks at all those colors and really likes it and thinks it's great, well, then it's art, because when they look at that, it gives them some kind of an emotional impact. It's happy, it's gay, it's cheerful, it's light, it's whatever, and they want to put it on their wall. So art, then, the artist is more of a mechanic working out of his intellect. But that doesn't mean it isn't art. If people like it and enjoy it, and it means something to them, and they get something out of it, then I'd say, yeah, okay, that's art. But that artist is not really coming from his intuitive side. That artist just has a process he works, and it's an intellectual process. He's a mechanic, so he mechanically makes art. Like a programmer programs a computer that makes art. Well, the art can be very interesting, and people can look at it and get things out of it. So you have to look at both the person who appreciates the art can create, can make it art just because it's appreciated. And the person who does the art, the artist, they can, be more artful or creative in their process, or can just be a mechanic in their process. So there's all different kinds of art and where it goes. And I think we have to open it all up and call it all art, because it all produces things that are meaningful to people in some way or another. So sometimes art is a completely immersive process, like a musician playing to an audience live, rather than a musician that's in a studio, in a sound studio. It's just a different kind of art. The one in the studio can pay a lot more attention to precision, because if they do something that's not exactly the way they want, they can stop. Let's go back and do a retake of that, and they can keep doing it until they have the precision they want. Whereas the guy out on the stage doesn't have that. He starts, he makes mistakes or does a flub or misses things. Well, he keeps right on going as if it never happened. He has to go on with the show. And part of his art is handling and manipulating and making the audience happy, making the audience glad that they paid the money to be there. And part of his art is his showmanship when he's there, because they're not just listening to his music, they're watching him. And that showmanship is part of his art as well. So art's a very complex thing. It's not just a guy with a paintbrush or somebody with an instrument. It has a lot of different things in it and to it. And they're all part of the art. And they're all significant in their own way. So I guess I'm not a purist in art. I kind of think anything that people appreciate and has meaning to them, I kind of put that in as art, if that was its intention. Its intention was to have meaning to people. Improvisation, that just depends on the person. Some people are just buttoned down and they only do what's in front of them. If they don't have music in front of them, they're not going to play it. And other people only learned how to play the instrument just by picking it up and playing with it. They never had a lesson in their life. They can't read music, but they can play that instrument really, really well. So you got both ends that are both opposite to each other. And I think they all are fine. They're all good in art. We can We can use them all. To me, the improvisation is more kind of, what do we say, spontaneous art. Make it up as you go. It's expression of how you feel on that instrument. And it all just comes together and you play it and it comes out of your core, out of your soul, out of your center. It's being level activity. Intellect's gone altogether. Well, that's one form of art, but playing, some Bach sonata and doing it really, really well with feeling, well, you're just playing the notes as they're written there, but the extra feeling and timbre and, how hard you press the keys and how fast you do. And there's still lots of little details that you can make your own so that everybody that plays it doesn't sound the same. Well, then that's the art. But now that art has a much narrower confine in which it has to take place. It's in the minutia. Whereas if you're playing an instrument, the whole thing can be made up from beginning to end. And I think that just depends on the personality. If I were, if I had talent at playing an instrument like a piano, I probably would rather not play anything that was written down. I would just like to play with it and improvise, just make music that pleases me. That's my personality. But I know there are other personalities that would rather learn how to do it right and do it exactly the way it's written. So I still think it's all art, it's all useful, it's all meaningful. It just depends on what kind of person you are. One has to be more intuitive than the other. If you just read the notes, that's not real intuitive. That's just precision, learning how the hands should move based by what you see. Playing improvisation, that's almost entirely intuitive. That's got no intellect in it at all. You don't even think about where your hands go on the instrument. They just go wherever they go to express the feeling that you've got. So art can be more or less intuitive, but still all art, all meaningful.
I'm sure that maybe Bach was one of the most best improvisator out there. Donna, do I have maybe another segment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. So maybe this one will be more practical. In your book, MBT, you mentioned how transcendental meditation helps you to solve computer programming problems by getting in a kind of a meditative state. Can you give us some specific exercise or tools to get in that intuitive state? I think we could use some hint and tool to get more easily in a flow state or different ways to surrender in the creative process.
Okay, well, there's a few things you need to do in order to get into that intuitive flow. One of them, you need to get rid of fear. If you are a musician and you are afraid that the people listening are going to say, oh, that's terrible, and you care a whole lot about what other people think about what you're doing, then that will inhibit you from getting into that creative space, because the creative space is just an expression of you. So, and you don't do that because you're trying to please the audience. You do that because you're enjoying just the process of making the music or making the picture or whatever it is you're doing. So one, to let the creative process out, you have to get rid of fear. You can't be working toward an applause, I guess. You can't be working toward a particular outcome. The more you work to a particular outcome, then the less intuitive is your process. If you're in a completely intuitive process, then you're just doing it because you're expressing who you are. And then if people like it, well, that's good. If people don't like it, well, that's okay too, because you like doing it. Okay. Now, that doesn't necessarily make you successful as far as earning enough money to live on. Then you have this problem. Do I do art in a way that I make money because I'm working to what I know the audience wants, or do I do art that makes me happy because that's what I want? And I think most artists have to draw that line someplace. They have to do some of both. They have to, if they're going to make a living out of it, then they're going to have to do what the customer wants, even if they find that a little boring or stultifying. And they're going to have to do some of what they want, and they're going to have to mix that up in ways that suits them. So I think artists kind of have to wrestle that one to the ground on their own. Some of what they do is to make money, and some of what they do is to please themselves. Because intuition is an inner process to an individual. It's an individual process. It's a subjective process. It's not something you do together. It's something that somebody does individually. Now, a band can play together, but they're all a bunch of individuals who are cooperating with each other. Okay, so that's one thing, is you have to get rid of the fear. If you're too fearful, it'll be really hard to get into your intuition. The other thing is, go ahead.
I totally understand that you have to get rid of fear, but that's kind of really complicated topic, I've been playing music for more than 15 years, and I still have fear and anxiety, and I'm kind of getting in kind of the warrior way. Just I have some fear. I have trouble when I think what the audience would think about this, and am I ready, or am I good enough? And I'll always go through this kind of interior kind of fear and ego awareness in the service of fear thing. But I mean, beyond going through this process and just getting aware of what's going on, that fear is coming on, but I'm still doing it. I mean, that's the only process I know, just going through it. But the the storm of shit that kind of fear is going through me is still there after all this time. And sometimes I think it's maybe more there than when I was like a kiddo,
That's true of a lot of artists. They have butterflies before they start, and they have all these fears. But typically, once they start and get into it, then they let all that go, and they're just playing or singing or painting, or they do whatever. But the starting process starts out as being intellectual. Oh, I'm going to go up on a stage. There's going to be people listening. I hope they like what they hear. I don't want to, I hope I don't mess it up, or I don't do it badly. And so you've got all that going on, but that's just the preamble to you actually doing what you do. What you do then, once you start, the first 10 or 20 notes you play maybe have a lot of fear wrapped around them, but after that, you just get into doing it, and you let the fear just drops away, and you and the music become one thing, and the instrument, and you just play. So the fear, that's how you get rid of your fear there. The technique is to start on something that you know very, very well. So bands will do that. They'll get up in the first 5 or 6 songs they play, or just songs they've played hundreds of times. They play very well and they enjoy them. They're fun songs, and it's something they can get into it. And after they get into that intuitive space, now they're golden for all the rest of the evening. They're fine. But they start off with butterflies and fears to start with. And I think that's kind of typical. You're in your intellect until you let go of that intellect. Once you let go, it kind of disappears. So other things that you can do to get into that state is you can do meditation. Meditation would be a help. If you learn to meditate, that is a learned process that puts you into, or puts you out of the intellectual space into the intuitive space. So if you learn to meditate, and you learn so you can meditate in 10 seconds, It's not something that takes 10 minutes for you to get into. Well, you can sit down on the stage, you can take a deep breath, you can kind of go into that meditation state, and then the fear starts to drop away too. Getting into a good meditation state will let you get into a mind space where the fear isn't. The meditation would be a way to do it. Another is to realize that, okay, you've played this music before. It's not your first time on stage. It's not your first time with an audience. You know generally how audiences are going to react to you. And you know what the audience is like. Well, you start off with something that you know they're going to like, and something that you've done so many times that you know you'll do it well. So don't start off with your hardest piece that you've practiced the least. Start off with the one that's easy and that you know your audience is going to like. That'll put you into the groove, and then from then on you can stay in that groove. Other than that it's just practice, 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 because the more you practice, the more intuitive it gets and the less intellectual it gets.
Thank you, Tom. That winds up the 80-second Fireside Chat on a very sweet note. Thank you, Guillaume, and everyone who contributed such wonderful questions. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. Tom Campbell here. I and MBT Events hope you liked this video. We now have well over 1,000 hours of free video on this user-friendly, ad-free YouTube channel. Though these videos are free to our viewers, they represent many thousands of hours in production and editing, and many thousands of dollars invested in video and audio equipment, along with the required computers and software to store and process the raw video into finished products. So far, all of this content has been funded directly out of our own pockets. Be assured, we will always continue to do what we can. It's our life, our purpose, a labor of love that we will continue to pursue as best we can. However, those pockets are not as deep as they used to be. Thus, we are now seeking to augment our resources with support from our viewers. If you find something of significant value in our videos, please consider supporting their production through our Patreon account or through a one-time donation. The links are in the description below. Thank you.